At 6:03 in the morning, I found a bright blue piece of tape wrapped around my front doorknob, and by the time the sun went down that same day, my HOA had brought a locksmith to change my locks while I was still inside the house. 14 hours. That's all they gave me to erase 10 years of my life and disappear. And when I didn't move fast enough for them, they decided to do it for me. I heard the scrape before I heard the knock. Metal testing metal, slow and deliberate, like someone checking if my home was ready to be opened by force. I was still standing in the hallway in socks, coffee untouched on the counter, staring at that notice like it might rearrange itself into something reasonable if I blinked enough times. It didn't. It said, "Notice to vacate" in bold letters, and underneath it in calm, legal-looking language, it told me I had until 8:00 p.m. to remove all personal belongings and surrender possession of the property. 14 hours. No judge, no court date, no warning. Just a deadline that felt less like a rule and more like a threat. They didn't call me a resident. They didn't even call me a tenant. They called me a non-owner occupant, like I was a box left behind after a move. At the bottom of the page was the name Tiffany Cross, HOA, President, Cedar Hollow Community Association, and under that, Brent Lawson from Briargate Property Management. I remember thinking how neat it all looked, how confident they were that paper alone could scare me into vanishing. My first instinct was panic, real physical panic. My chest tightened, my hands started shaking, and for a moment I actually pictured myself throwing clothes into garbage bags, stuffing drawers into boxes, rushing out before anyone could stop me. That's what the notice was designed to do. 14 hours isn't a deadline, it's a trap. It's meant to make you move before you think. So I didn't touch a single box. Instead, I grabbed my phone and started documenting everything. I took photos of the notice on the door front and back. I filmed a slow video showing my house number, the street sign, the time on my microwave, the tape itself. I zoomed in on the line about abandoned property because I wanted their lie preserved in high definition in case they tried to rewrite it later. My heart was still pounding, but something else was kicking in too, something colder, steadier. Then I called my mom. She answered, already tired, like she'd been expecting another petty HOA violation, another complaint about trash cans or lawn edges. When I told her they gave me 14 hours to move out, her voice sharpened instantly. "No," she said. "Don't pack. Call your father." My dad, Frank Dawson, was in rehab after a stroke. When he picked up, he didn't bother with hello. "Read it," he said. I read every line, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. When I finished, there was a pause, and then he said, calm and cold, "They can't evict you, not like this. If they try to change the locks or touch your belongings, you call the police. You document everything, and you get a real estate attorney as soon as the office is open. And whatever you do, don't panic for their benefit." That house was his. He bought it with his money, meant it for my mom and me. The paperwork to formally transfer things had been slow because life had gotten messy, because strokes and hospital rooms and rehab schedules don't care about neat timelines. Tiffany knew that gap. She knew exactly where the crack was, and she was aiming straight for it. By 8:15, I had written a timeline at my kitchen table, hands steadier now. I pulled out my fireproof box and scanned everything that mattered. Payment records, gift letters, trust paperwork. I labeled the folder Ownership and Authorization like I was building a case file instead of defending my own home. At 9:40, my doorbell rang. I hit record before I even stood up. Tiffany Cross was on my porch in her HOA polo clipboard tucked into her arm like it was a badge. Next to her stood Brent Lawson holding a tablet, polished and careful, the kind of man who sells procedure the way other people sell pressure. "Good morning, Claire," Tiffany said, smiling like we were neighbors chatting about the weather. "You received our notice." "I did," I said, keeping my voice level. "And I'm not leaving." Her smile tightened. "It isn't optional. You're not the legal owner of record. The board voted to remove you from the premises." "Show me the court order," I said. Brent stepped in smoothly like this was his cue. "We have owner authorization on file to secure the property," he said. "The owner isn't in residence." "He's alive," I said. "He's in rehab, and he authorized me." Tiffany didn't blink. "This is about community standards," she said. "Neighbors have concerns." That was the moment something snapped into focus for me. I lifted my phone a little higher. If anyone enters this home or touches my belongings without a court order, I will call the police, I said. And I will name you personally. Your signature is on that notice. You wouldn't dare, Tiffany said, her voice finally losing its sweetness. Watch me, I said. They left with Tiffany tossing over her shoulder. We're giving you a chance to leave peacefully, like a threat was a favor. By noon, I was on a video call with Kara Whitman, a real estate attorney who didn't waste time lecturing me about mistakes or paperwork. She gave instructions. Clear, sharp, unemotional. They can't do this, she said. If they show up with a locksmith, mover security, anyone you record and call 911. You tell dispatch it's an attempted unlawful lockout. No court order, no exceptions. That afternoon, Kara sent a cease and desist letter to the board and to Briargate. Calm language, sharp edges. She also told me to ask around quietly. So I crossed the street to Pauline Grant, who had lived in Cedar Hollow long enough to see HOA presidents come and go. Pauline didn't hesitate. They pressured the McKinleys out, she said. Same tone, same process. Briargate handled it. When I got home, an email landed from an unknown address. The subject line said, "Save this." Attached was a screenshot from Briargate's internal system. 7:15 p.m., rekey authorization, secure asset. Notes, owner authorization on file. Scan occupant non-owner. It wasn't a warning, it was a schedule. I forwarded it to Kara. She replied almost immediately. This shows intent. Don't open the door tonight. If they touch the lock, call 911. That was when the doubt crept in. Real doubt. I sat on my couch staring at the walls, the floors, the corners I knew by heart, and I wondered if I was fighting something I couldn't win. If maybe I was clinging to a technicality while everyone else saw me as a problem. If I was being stubborn instead of realistic. There was a moment, a quiet, awful moment, where I thought about packing anyway, just to make it stop. About leaving before I was forced out, about sparing myself the humiliation of being dragged through my own front yard by procedure and paperwork. I stood up and walked to the door, rested my forehead against the wood, and let myself feel how unfair it was, how small they had made me feel, how easy it would be for them to erase me if I let them. And then I remembered my dad's voice, calm, certain, don't panic for their benefit. And I decided I wasn't going anywhere. At 7:08 p.m., a white van rolled onto Cedar Hollow Drive. KPRO Locksmithing was printed on the side. 2 men got out with tool bags. A security guard in a black Sentinel polo hovered behind them. Then Tiffany arrived in her HOA golf cart, and Brent pulled in behind her like this was an appointment on a shared calendar. They gathered on my lawn. Tiffany pointed at my door. Brent handed the locksmith a sheet of paper. The locksmith nodded businesslike. That's how people get hurt sometimes, quietly with forms. Tiffany knocked loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Claire, you're out of time," she called. "Open the door." "Do you have a court order?" I asked through the door. "We're rekeying under owner authorization," Brent answered immediately. "Changing the lock while I'm inside is a lockout," I said. "Step away from the door." "You are not the owner," Tiffany snapped. "My father is," I said, "and he authorized me." Tiffany made a small, impatient gesture. The locksmith knelt. I heard the first scrape against my lock. My body went still, not frozen with fear, but focused. I hit record, framing hands and faces, then dialed 911. "My HOA is attempting an unlawful lockout," I said when the dispatcher answered. "They have a locksmith changing my exterior lock right now. No court order. HOA President Tiffany Cross and Property Manager Brent Lawson are on scene." "Do not open your door," the dispatcher said. "Officers are on the way." Outside, Tiffany switched to her performance voice. "We're keeping the neighborhood safe," she announced, loud and righteous. Brent muttered something to the locksmith. "Once it's rekeyed, she'll have to leave." That was the moment Tiffany thought she'd won, because she believed the lock would do her bullying for her. At 7:26, a police SUV turned onto Cedar Hollow Drive. The locksmith froze. The security guard straightened. 2 officers stepped out. One approached my door. I cracked it just enough to pass papers through. "I live here," I said. "Here's the notice, the cease and desist, and the owner authorization." The officer read, then looked at Tiffany like she was a nuisance, not a ruler. The second officer walked over to the locksmith. "Who hired you?" he asked. "Management," the locksmith said, holding up the work order. "Court order," the officer asked Brent. "We have authorization," Brent started. "Court order," the officer repeated. "You can't lock someone out of their home," he said flatly. "Stop work now." Tiffany flushed. "This is private property. HOA jurisdiction." "You are not a court," the officer said. "If that lock is touched again, we document attempted unlawful lockout." The locksmith packed up without arguing. The security guard backed away from my porch. Tiffany stood there with nothing left but paper. Before the officers left, one of them looked at me and said, "Call again if they return. Keep recording." The next part wasn't fireworks. It was consequences. Kara sent the incident report and the internal screenshot to the HOA's attorney and Briargate's corporate office. A week later, the HOA treasurer called an emergency meeting. The room was packed. Tiffany tried to open with her usual righteous tone. She didn't get far. "Our insurer is asking if last week was intentional," the treasurer said. "If it was, we may have no coverage." "We were securing the property," Tiffany said. "You attempted a lockout after receiving a cease and desist," Kara said evenly. "With a third-party locksmith, without a court order. We have documentation of intent." Tiffany pointed at me. "She isn't on the deed." "Her father is alive," the treasurer said, "and he authorized her. You tried anyway." No one moved. No one defended her. "We're suspending the president's authority pending review," the treasurer said, "and terminating Briargate's contract effective immediately." I walked out without celebrating. Back at my door, the lock was still mine. The tape was gone, but the faint outline where it had clung to the metal stayed a reminder of how close they came. I stood there in the quiet. No engines, no clipboards, no metal scraping brass, and then I went inside and closed the door. Power doesn't come from a clipboard or a deadline. It comes from knowing your rights and refusing to disappear.